Contrast paints are truly exceptional. They are fantastic for applying solid base coats of colour, often enhancing the shading in recesses when used over a light undercoat, opening up a whole world of possibilities. Varying from super opaque colours that block out areas in one coat, to lighter translucent tones that will slightly tint an area. So today I'll be going through a few interesting and alternative ways to use contrast paints to brighten up and enhance your paint schemes. And with that, let's get stuck in. The full list of paints used today is on screen now for this exploration into contrast. There are a fair few of them, so feel free to pause the screen and take note of any that you may like to use in future, as well as extra tools we've used to show off these techniques. If you are new to painting and want to know more about the paints and techniques used in this video, check out our Painting Essentials playlist on our YouTube channel. To start our contrast journey, we'll want a solid undercoat for our plastic minis. Lighter colours such as Wraithbone, Grey Seer or White Scar are typically used as a foundation to keep the final finish as bright as possible. We have a great video on our channel that goes into the basics of using contrast paints. For today's first example, I'm using the super opaque Baal Red in one thick coat straight from the pot over the Wraithbone undercoated Sister of Battle, to establish a solid, vibrant base for the Order of the Bloody Rose. Painting contrast paints in sections helps avoid any build-up of paint that may leave dark spots or clog up any details. If any occurs, soak up the excess with a clean brush and this will easily fix it. It'll take around 30 minutes to dry, and once it has, adding a second coat can help fill in the areas for a solid base coat. Next, I'll add a layer of Flesh Tearers Red all across the armour. This red covers extremely well, but it is a bit more transparent than the Baal Red, allowing some of the original colour to come through, adding shading and depth to the Baal Red, whilst the base coat helps brighten the overall look. You don't have to stick to lighter colours to undercoat your miniatures either. Contrast paints can be applied over nearly any undercoat, resulting in different effects depending on the base colour. To show this, I've undercoated a Space Marine in Magmadroth Blue, ready for a layer of Ultramarines Blue. I've added a little drop of water to the paint mix like so, thinning the paint for a lighter consistency, allowing the paint to flow into the recesses and leave more of the original colour to come through. As it's a little thinner, it lets me build up an easy gradient across flatter areas like the legs and deeper recesses where shadows naturally sit. This elevates the Ultramarine with a beautifully saturated finish and deep recesses with ease. I find painting contrast paints over an existing colour can lead to a fuller and much smoother finish, thanks to the base colour here complementing the contrast paint. One other way to start your contrast painting projects is by undercoating the mini with a dark colour and applying a mid and light tone to add shadows and highlights, ready for contrast paints to bring the colour. And there are a few ways to do this. One way to do this is by using two spray paints to undercoat this Plaguebearer. This is known as Zenithal priming, which simulates the shadow effect created by a light source coming in from above. I've started by spraying this mini in Deathguard Green for the colour in the deepest recesses. Once that's dried, I'll spray a mid-tone like Wraithbone from roughly 45 degrees above the model and then just turn it around so it hits all the areas I want, leaving a naturally shaded miniature we can have fun with when using contrast paints. After that, I'll take a dry brush and apply a light dry brushing of White Scar on any of the raised edges and details to enhance the highlights. You don't have to just use dry brushing here. Adding fine line highlights across the model will create sharper coloured highlights. With the natural shadows and highlights at the ready, let's add some colour. I'm using Plaguebearer Flesh for the main body, Volupus Pink for all the guts and sores, and even a little in the mouth and around the eye for extra soreness. With so many colours on offer, feel free to swap out any of the contrast paints as you see fit to suit a scheme of your very own. I'll wrap up with Cygor Brown on any of the metal bits for a worn metal look, along with its claws and horns. Then, bish bash bosh, a speed painted mini is ready for gaming and has a great deal of colour variation with minimal effort. Another great way to add variation is by dry brushing lighter colours over base coats, leaving a similar effect to Zenithal priming, but opens you up to the entire paint range. So let's do something wild with this Saurus Warrior and apply Doomfire Magenta over a White Scar undercoat for a vivid pink base to coat this scaly skin. With the contrast paint dry, it's time to add a heavy dry brush of Emperor's Children for a mid-tone, applying a second layer of dry brushing to fill in the raised details with this lighter colour. Then I'll move on to White Scar for an equally heavy dry brush. That will leave this warrior with a range of pinky white tones. With the highlights on, here comes the magic. Using Iyandan Yellow's transparency, combined with the powers of colour theory, creates rich orangey brown shading across the textured scales when combined together. This is because they are complementary colours, allowing them to enrich each other in paint schemes. I'm always blown away by this little pink trick, and how it beautifully complements the yellow in the recesses. You wouldn't have even known pink was used at all. Not only can these paints be applied for base coats or shading, they're great for transitioning colours together to create light work of effects like power weapons, fire, and many more. But what about colour melding Tzeentchian demons? I've base coated a Flamer of Tzeentch in Imperial Fist Yellow as a starting point and will need not one, but two brushes for the next bit. First, I'll apply a second thin layer of Imperial Fist Yellow using the first brush on a small area around the middle of the body. but any starting point where you'd like the transition to be is fine. Then I'll quickly switch to a second brush and paint Magmadroth Flame just above the fresh yellow. Clean one of the brushes and you want it damp but not sodden. Gently push the paint together on the surface and you'll start to see them blending to create a smooth transition. If one of the colours is bleeding into the other, as you can see here with the orange, this can easily be fixed by adding a little bit of yellow paint and smoothing it out. Thanks to contrast paints being thinner than base and layer paints, they dry a little bit more slowly, giving me more time to work with the paints on the model. This makes these fixes super easy. It's important to avoid painting over the same area for too long though, as this could accidentally lift the paint and create unwanted texture. Just allow these to dry before working on any more. After painting the orange a little further up the body and arms, this flamer's colour shift is coming together nicely. I'll repeat the same techniques using Sigvald Burgundy, placing it above the orange. This paint is ideal for adding deep tones to the flamer and complements the yellow and oranges beautifully. Next, I'll tidy up any accidental spills with grey Seer and in the multiple mouths on the face. Once the Imperial Fist yellow is reapplied, it'll be like the spillage was never there. Perfect. With the model cleaned up, we're ready for the next colour. This time, instead of blending the colours on the model, I'll mix 2 parts contrast medium to 1 part Luxion Purple for a lighter tone. But feel free to use water as an alternative. This allows me to gradually build up the colour in layers by pushing the brush more towards the areas I want darker, leaving more paint to accumulate there. This colour also works incredibly well straight over bright yellows, adding an intense ethereal shading to the flames on the flamer. I finish this up with a dry brush of Phalanx Yellow across the yellow to brighten the highlights, and we can call this demon done. I love playing around with colours and seeing how they interact. This eclectic mix of colours is just a sample, and I definitely recommend trying out a few wild schemes of your own. Another useful tip of mine is to use contrast paints to tint bases for a more natural look. To start this off, I prepared these bases earlier with a base of Astrogranite, Sterling Mud and Armageddon Dust, and a couple of dry brush layers on each so we can get stuck in. To start off, I'm going to add some greens to this rocky Astrogranite base for a mossy finish. First, I'll add Gut Ripper Flesh from the pot and place a drop anywhere on the base. I've cleaned the brush, and with the sodden bristles, I've pushed the paint around until I'm happy with where it's settled, applying a second drop to intensify the colour if needed. Once that dries, I'll want a darker green like Creed Camo to add some colour variation, applying this in the same way over the Gut Ripper Flesh, adding more depth to the tones, ending with a light dry brush of Screaming Skull to tie the colours together. The greens have really enhanced the Astrogranite, giving the rocks a lovely mossy feel. Now let's add some different coloured waters to the next 2 bases. On a palette, add a couple of blobs of Ardcoat, then a single drop of contrast paint of your choosing. Here I've mixed Nazdreg Yellow and Kroxigor Scales separately into Ardcoat. Now it's time to apply these mixtures to the bases. I've added Nazdreg Yellow to the Sterling Mud base to make a toxic swamp, focusing on the gaps in the texture where water would naturally collect. For the Armageddon Dust base, I'll apply Kroxigor Scales to give it a light blue tint, resembling the water one might see on a beach. Building up more on one side of the base, like I'm doing here, also helps build up more coloration for a sense of depth to the water. The water effects have dried beautifully. Additionally, the contrast paints help avoid the risk of Ardcoat looking cloudy if applied too thickly, replacing it with a vibrant colour. There are so many amazing ways to use contrast paints, and playing with these has made light work of what might have been hard to achieve techniques. For more painting videos, head over to our YouTube channel. Or if you need more hands-on help, you can pop over to one of our Warhammer stores where our friendly staff would be happy to help. Thanks for watching, ciao for now, and see you in the next one.